So, Ben Askren versus Jake Paul. The fight didn't go the way that I wanted it to go, and I'm sure many people like myself are sick and tired of hearing, even saying Jake Paul's name. They're seeing it all over social media and the internet. But despite the fight going the way it did, there's something that prompted my curiosity, and that is fighters' pay. The difference between the salaries of boxers and mixed martial artists, because even though Ben Askren did lose this fight, he still went home with $500,000, which was, that's still life-changing money for a lot of people, for the average person. Jake Paul, who won, went home with approximately $690,000. But, even that being said, what's really prompted my curiosity is the difference in salaries, of the two sports, let me call them sister sports, because they're both combat sports. When Jake Paul had beaten Ben Askren, he started calling out many big names of the mixed martial arts community: Dylan Dennis, DC Cormier, Tyron Woodley, Mike Perry. Mike Perry wasn't called up, but Mike Perry would have loved to fight him. And Dustin Poirier helped stir the pot a little bit there, and said that these two should have a boxing match. But it prompted my curiosity in that these guys were happy to take this gun in the boxing match, because I think what really prompted their own interest in doing so was the amount of money that Ben Askren took home. So I was wondering, what is the difference, and why is it that boxing usually tends to earn more money for their athletes, for the athletes that do participate in the sport on a public platform? So basically, if you look at both sports, starting with boxing is split into several tiers. You have the superstars, the professionals, and the amateur level. So superstars, as the name suggests, will start at the highest level. Now here you have the boxers who have a big, well-known names, because they've fought so many fights and they've won so many fights and they've performed really well. And they've forged out a successful career for themselves in the sport, such as Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Amir Khan, Canelo, and even Mike Tyson, even though he's currently retired. Now at this level, boxers can expect to earn approximately $60 million for a successful fight alone. So even if you don't win that fight, you're still and you're still a big name in the sport. You can still earn a really significant. Well, I say significant. You can still earn some seriously good money for just participating, and even if you don't win, you can still earn a decent salary. So if you don't win, you can still earn a nice sum of approximately $25 million. But on both sides, whether you win or you lose, you will need a really good manager to negotiate the figures for you, so you can still be compensated well enough for all of your hard work and for all of the abuse you have to endure to whether win or even lose the fight. Also, a lot of the earnings not only come from the fight itself, but also they come from the sponsorship deals. And even if you're a really big name in boxing, you've got a really big social media following on Instagram, Twitter, on Facebook, and you've got a really big YouTube channel or really big podcast, you can also earn money through sponsorships as well. And of course, to be in this to be in this territory of earnings, to be at this level of the boxing game, to be considered a boxing superstar, you obviously will need to have had years upon years of hard work and training behind you, as well as a lot of hard work. When I say hard training, I mean a lot of training and hard work behind you. So it doesn't come easy. These are guys who have risen through the ranks because of all the hard work they put into their craft, perfecting their craft every single day. They've stayed in the gym. They practically live in the gym, and this boxing basically is their bread and butter. It's in their blood. Moving down the level just by one tier, you've got you now find yourself at the professional boxers level. Now these guys haven't reached the superstardom level yet, but they're still earning a decent living from the boxing and fights that they do. And at this level, most boxers usually can anticipate to have at least 3 to 4 big event fights per year, and usually their salary tends to be around the $51,000 mark per year. Now that may be a decent amount of money for most people, but many do argue, and I would agree with this, that for the fact that you're having to put in so much hard work, and then at the end of it, deal with so much abuse when you're competing in the ring there. You know, that one night will decide whether you win or lose, depending on how you perform in the ring. Many people, and again I would agree with this, that figure is way too low to compensate you for all of the hard work and the abuse you have to go through, because let's not forget, there's the hard work of training and just keeping strict diet, maintaining weights, and just maintaining being in shape, and just making sure you're ready for the fight. Then there's the issue. Then there's a stage of actually performing, competing in the ring. After that, whether you win or lose, you also have to consider any health issues you have afterwards, especially things such as dealing with being struck in the head so many times, being punched drunk, and other issues such as CTE, memory loss because of brain damage, and so on. So all those things have to be taken into consideration. And if you're in a country such as the US, and maybe even here in the UK as well, but any country around the world, I think it's safe to say that in many places where you go to, the sort of healthcare you will need for those sorts of ailments will not necessarily be covered by the government's health service. I mean, even here in the UK, the NHS may not cover it. In the US, definitely it's not covered, that you have to pay for your own health service and for your own healthcare, so you'll need your own health insurance. Now, moving down the level further, you now have the amateur boxers. Now, at this level, the salary does tend to be significantly lower, a lot lower than two classes above it. And in order for the boxers to earn a living at this level, they'll obviously need to spend a lot of time training in order to win. And to at this level, basically, you are still trying to make a name for yourself, try to start your career, try and win as many fights as possible, because you're still trying to make a name for yourself and trying to build up your name, your brand, and you're trying to, though I don't like to use this word, trying to create a lot of hype around you. So whenever an event is scheduled and you're going to be fighting, at least if you're lucky enough to be on the main card, a lot of people come and see your fights. There'll be a lot of eyes in this event, and potentially you can still earn a decent amount of money. But at this level, most boxers are obviously trying to get into the level above the professional boxer level, because at this level, you do find that a lot of the boxers they do face other issues as well, not just the money side, but sometimes in a fight they can be double crossed by their managers. They'll participate in the fight, a boxing match, they win, and then one thing leads to another, and then told an excuse, blah blah blah, sorry, we can't pay you because of this or that. So things like that do happen, because at this level, you're still trying to make a name for yourself. You're still trying to get people, the big names, the big promoters, to take you seriously. And if you're not taken seriously, you can be walked all over. Can be treated like crap. So at this level, boxers can earn potentially between $19,000 to $26,000 a year. And yeah, as I said before, a lot of hard work is needed to just build yourself up and build up your career and your name. Now, moving on to the sister sport of combat sports, which is MMA. Now, it's a similar sort of tier system: the superstars, the professionals, and the amateurs. So, starting with the superstars, you have the big names, examples of the superstars such as Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor, GSP, Khabib. Even though GSP and Khabib are no longer participating, no longer active, they're retired, but you can just use them as examples of when they were fighting anyway. They potentially can earn a large amount of money, though it's still not nowhere near as large as what you find it on the boxing side of things. So at this level, fighters can anticipate to earn a basic salary of $3 million per year, and further afield, the rest can be earned through sponsorship deals, through their social media following, and they can earn approximately $30 million extra. Excuse me. Sorry guys, my throat's getting dry there a little bit. So, of course, to reach this level in mixed martial arts, you do need, again, obviously, a lot of hard work, a lot of experience, a lot of success, and of course, it's always much more preferable and beneficial to the fighter if they've got in their record, they've got more wins than they do over losses. And of course, at this level, it's not just the fact of how many wins you have or losses, but how entertaining of a fighter you are. So if you do have a lot of wins, but you're not that fun to watch, then if really dull inside in the octagon, inside the cage, then really you're not gonna have many people. Even though you win, a lot of people are not going to tune in to watch you fight. So that again can also affect your purse. So moving down, we now have the professional fighter level. Now at this level, the average fighter can anticipate to earn approximately $38,000 per year, and it's also good to take into account that at this level, a lot of professional fighters unfortunately still earn less than this, and their earnings fall into the range of £17,520 per year. But of course, I will digress a little bit further. At this level, there is like a large range, which ranges from 17,520 to an upper range of 59,000. But even then, that being said, the fighters are still paying for a lot of things. They're paying for their gym equipment, for the venues they go to train, paying for their nutritionists, their trainers, their coaches, security, hotels where they stay, travel. A lot of other things. All those expenses they have to pay for, and before they can actually keep on their winning money, or even whatever the money they get, even if they lose, for showing up, they've got after making all these expenses, you do tend to find that actually you haven't got much left. So at this level, I would assume that sponsorship deals also help as well. But again, it would depend on the sort of organization you're fighting for. So a good example is the UFC, who are very, very stringent and very, very inflexible with the sort of sponsorship deals that their fighters can have. Of course, everybody knows about the Reebok deal that happened sometime in 2016-15, and that really hurt a lot of the purses for many fighters, and they were actually forced to leave because they lost a lot of money through the sponsorship deals, which had to be cancelled because everything now had to go through Reebok. So now the amateur level in mixed martial arts is probably the worst ranking of all, and it's probably even worse than the amateur level in boxing, because at this level the fighters usually don't tend to earn anything at all, and how you're treated by managers and so-called promoters is actually far worse. Fighters don't really earn anything at all at this level. They're not paid anything to even compete. Most of the money earned at an event goes to the individuals and the organizations that's actually responsible for holding the event and making the event happen. And the promoter who makes sure that the fight happens, of course, like in boxing, there's always at this level, there's still the issue of the fighters still building themselves up at this level and still trying to make a name for themselves, still trying to forge out their career. And again, at this level, you're still trying to get the big names to take you seriously. But for fighting, because it's still very much, mixed martial arts is still very much a sport that's still growing in comparison to boxing, which is a far more established sport around the world. Mixed martial arts, at this level, you can have amateur fights, even illegal in many parts of the world. So you're going to be holding an event, and for one reason or the other, it doesn't happen. It doesn't hold. If that does happen, you do find in many situations the people promoting the fight actually keep all the money. The fighters don't get anything, even if it's a fighter that wins. And they don't. You can find the people responsible for holding the fight can double cross the fighters. And I have heard many stories where this has actually happened. And again, fighters at this level still have to pay for things such as travel costs and expenses for hotels, paying their coaches, and just the usual things you need to train to become a fighter. Now, the $1 million question. Excuse me. Mouth gets so dry so quickly when speaking and making these podcasts. So, why do boxers tend to earn more than mixed martial arts fighters? Well, boxers tend to earn more than mixed martial arts fighters, since the promoters that they work for do not work using a sort of monopolized system. On the other side with mixed martial arts, and a very good example again is the UFC. the UFC was the first mixed martial arts promotion, fighting organization that promoted the sport around the world, especially here in the West, in the UK, Europe, and North America. Are the first people to really get eyeballs on the sport, and they're really the first lot that managed to make the sport mainstream. Even now it's still a growing sport. It is nowhere near as well as established as boxing is. So because of that, the UFC have a very big share in the market for the sport, and again, because of that, they can choose how they pay their fighters. In some cases, whether they pay their fighters at all, and then they are notorious for how badly they pay their fighters. And because of that, because they got almost like they got that, like they're the king of mixed martial arts when it comes to mixed martial arts promotions and mixed martial arts events. They know they can pay their fighters whatever they like, and still many people watch their fights, will pay to watch their fights, and many other fighters will happily come in and take the place of the fighters who speak up and make a lot of noise about the inadequate salary that they're receiving, which is, as far as they're concerned, isn't really enough to equate to or to compensate all of the hard work and the abuse they've had to undergo to win a fight. So even if they lose a fight, they still want some adequate compensation for all of the hard work and the abuse they've been through. Now, another reason why is that probably because boxing is far more well established, the boxing athletes do have a wider option of fighting organizations to choose from, whereas fighting organizations for mixed martial arts at the moment isn't so much. We've got the big names such as Bellator, UFC, ONE FC, and of course the name that I've been mentioning now for a big chunk of this podcast, the UFC. And of course there's other names such as PFL and other brands which probably are not so well known as these ones I just mentioned, Bellator, UFC, and ONE FC. And it's not just the fact that there's more fighting organizations with boxing, but also the fighting organizations in mixed martial arts. When it comes to the fighter being promoted, being part of a fight in mixed martial arts, the fighter has to go and enter into a contract with the organization. Again, the UFC is a really, really good example of this because they're so notorious for doing this. The fighting organization more or less ties the fighter into a contract, and the contract has to run its whole course. So if a contract consists of 4 or 5 fights, the fighter has to fight all of those fights before, regardless of the salary, regardless of anything else, whether they're winning or losing, they have to fight all of those fights and complete all of those fights before they either renew their contracts or find another organization that they want to fight for or work with. But with boxing, it's quite different. In boxing, the opposite is the case. If a particular promoter or if a particular fighter can't agree on something, the fighter is more than happy, within their rights. They're free to move to another organization and probably work there instead. But with mixed martial arts, you can't do that. Again, look at the UFC. You can see they're just a really good, notorious example of how they treat their fighters. How their fighters have to stay in a contract and basically fulfill that contract. In some cases, there have been stories in the past, and this probably was in the early days, in the early to mid 2000s, whereby there were certain TV programs, certain tasks that the organization wanted their fighters to do, which didn't have much to do with mixed martial arts, with the sport as such, but just to boost the branding of the organization. The organization said that the fighter had to do this, otherwise they'd be cut from the team, they'd be cut from the organization. But in boxing, that rarely ever happens. So I think I've mentioned already that mixed martial arts really has only become mainstream in the past maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Probably from around 2010 or 09, 2011, it's become much more mainstream. Whereas boxing does have a far more richer history. a history that goes back about 70, 80 or 90 years. It's a very, very old but very, very well established sport around the whole world. Mixed martial arts is not necessarily the same case at all, even because there's some countries whereby mixed martial arts just not just practicing but also hosting a mixed martial arts event, a mixed martial arts fight, is completely illegal. And even if you go to the US, although this is different now, but not too long ago, certain states, the UFC and I think Bellator and other American fighting organizations couldn't host fights in certain states in the US because it was illegal. So I think I mentioned the history of the sport. And yeah, boxing also tends to reach a much more wider audience around the world. And those, just that particular point there does also help the boxers earn more money, because again, you have more people further afield, whether it's outside their country, where they're from, or outside the country where they're going to be hosting the fight, or the country where they're going to be competing, or where the venue's based. Again, more people can watch their fights, more people can, there's more eyes, more attention on the event. And also if they do win, if events that they're involved in, or events where they're going to be competing in, is shown to more people further afield outside of their country, or outside of the country where they're going to be competing in, more and more often, then many people internationally will know their name, will know who they are. And again, that helps, that adds to that stardom fame, that adds to that boosting of their name and that boosting of their brand as an individual. So again, it helps them earn more money. More brands around the world, international brands, even brands outside of their country, would like to approach them for sponsorship deals. So again, that is that's an added bonus right there. So another issue with that kind of dictates the salary between the level of pay that the mixed martial arts get in comparison to boxers is the weight division. So excuse me, guys. Yes, the weight divisions. So in the UFC has 9 weight divisions, whilst in most boxing promoters have around 17. So again, this if you've got more weight divisions, then of course most your athletes have a bigger range, a wider range of weights, of body weight, of weights to choose from, body weight wise, in order to compete. So some people may choose to compete at, say, in pounds. Let me use that system. If they want to compete, say, at 70 pounds, they can between 70 pounds to 80 pounds, they can fall into that category. Or some people want to compete at 90 pounds to 100 pounds, or 100 pounds to 110 pounds. They can compete in that sort of category, boxing wise. Whereas in MMA, you don't have, the range really isn't that much. So likewise, again, the example I use in the UFC, they only have 9 weight divisions, whereas most boxing promoters have about 17 weight divisions. So we have more weight classes, more weight divisions. You have obviously have a wider spectrum of of weights that you can perform at, you can compete at. So where the weight divisions are much more narrower, so before I get jumbled up, but where the weight divisions are a lot more narrower, obviously there isn't that much liberty and that much freedom how you can compete in the sport. So we've got more liberty and much more flexibility in the weight divisions to at which way you can potentially compete at. Obviously there's more flexibility in how I'm just jumping the whole thing up and just fucking the whole thing up. The more weight divisions you have, the more flexible you can be with your weight and how you choose to compete in the sport. The less weight divisions you have, the opposite is the case. So that is kind of self-explanatory. Don't need to get too technical with that. And yes, sponsors. So boxing promoters tend to be far more flexible with the sport with sponsors. They're not too stringent with it. Mixed martial arts organizations, it depends which one you go to. the UFC is notorious, and they're known for the Reebok deal that they had back in 2015 or 16. And I think I already mentioned this probably earlier in the podcast. Oh wow, my mouth is getting so dry so quickly. So, organizations such as Bellator, One Championship, PFL, they seem to be a lot more flexible with the sponsorships. But of course, I'm sure they'll have some say in probably how many sponsorships and sponsors an athlete can have, especially when they're competing in the octagon. How many brands they can have printed on their attire, and their shorts and their gloves and whatever else they're wearing. The UFC, however, is not the case. It was before, but before they had the Reebok deal, athletes could go in there and have as many brands as they wanted to, printed, as many sponsors as they like, basically. But now that's not the case. Everything's been narrowed down to Reebok. The only brand you'll see when you're in the octagon there, when you're watching the fight, is a Reebok brand on there, if it's wearing on the upperwear, and for men on the shorts. I've heard that even in certain interviews, that because the athlete was wearing Nike socks or Nike flip flops or Nike shorts, they had to do the interview with all those things taken off. They had to take off their shoes, their socks, even their shorts, just to do the interview, to make sure that no other brand name apart from Reebok was showing in the interview. I mean, that's just how stringent, how strict they are. With other organizations, with Bellator, One Championship, PFL, that doesn't seem to be necessarily the case. With boxing promoters, that's not the case at all. There's far more flexibility. So, excuse me, that's another factor that more or less dictates just the level of the salary, the level of the salary of mixed martial artists in comparison to the level of the salary of boxers. And I have to say that the UFC, they're notorious for doing this, and it's left a lot of their fighters feeling very much exploited. And I think not too long ago there was a lawsuit that was brought forward in the courts in the US. A few fighters who were currently fighting at the time, still competing in the UFC. I think John Fitch was one of them. I think he led the whole case against the UFC. I can't remember. I'm not sure what the outcome of the case was, but that just goes to show how bad and how annoyed some fighters were feeling, and rightly so as well, because for combat sports, is a brutal sport, especially mixed martial arts. Well, in my own eyes, from what I can see, mixed martial arts seems to be much more bloodier, much more brutal than boxing does. Some people may disagree. That's fine, but that's not my opinion. It's something again that I'll look into another episode. So for something like mixed martial arts, I would say for all of the abuse you have to go through, and on the top of all of the hard work, and again, not forgetting you have to compete at some point. I would say that the issue of the sponsors, especially for an organization such as the UFC that has a massive share in the mixed martial arts and market of the sport, that says, for all the money the UFC earns, for all the money they make in all their fights, and also sponsorship deals as well. I'm sure many fighters, and rightly so, will be feeling really angry. I would feel the same way as well. You wouldn't be when you want to be properly compensated for all of the hard work and for all of the abuse you've gone through just to have a decent, enjoyable, and good career in the sport, doing something that you love. So to conclude, mixed martial arts fighters, especially those in the UFC, do tend to get a really bad deal in comparison to boxers. And for mixed martial arts fighters, if they really want to earn a really good salary, then they really should be aiming to try and attain the superstar level of the sport, because at least at that level, if they've got a big name, if they've really made a big name for themselves, if they've had a really successful career, if they're really popular in the sport, if a lot of people tune in to watch them compete, then at that level you can almost command the sort of salary that you want your employer to pay you. So I'll leave it at that, guys, and you can make of it what you will. So UFC 261 coming up more or less today, because I'm recording this podcast on a Saturday morning here in the UK. It's about 1:30 in the morning. So we have almost what's going to be considered to be the rematch between Jorge Masvidal and Kamaru Usman. So Masvidal, looking at one of his last fights with Nate Diaz at UFC 244. In that fight, Masvidal did look well-rounded, had good stand-up, was dishing out some really heavy shots, and he seemed to be moving quite well and seemed to be moving quite evasively when necessary. But in his fight with Kamaru Usman at UFC 251, I could see that, Masvidal had to fight a little bit harder, as in really had to be on his game, on point, when he was in the octagon there with Usman, in comparison to what he was like when he was fighting Nate Diaz. So Usman, especially on the ground, Usman has a really good ground game. So, but I mean, for my prediction of what's going to happen at basically what's going to be considered the rematch, I think Usman's going to take the win again. Yes, from what I can see, he's got good stand up, and he seems to be the much more well-rounded fighter out of the two guys. So yes, I'm going to go with Kamaru Usman on this one. He's going to defend that title, and we're going to be hearing Bruce Buffer say "and still" while they're holding up Kamaru Usman's hand at the end of the fight. So the other fight that interests me on the fight card for tonight's fight, because now I can say tonight, it's a Saturday morning. Zhang Weili versus Rose Namajunas. Now Weili looks like I haven't seen her fight before, but looking at one of her past fights against Joanna Jędrzejczyk Joanna at UFC 248. Briefly looking at her background, Weili has an amazing record: 21 wins, and just one single loss. Currently, she sits at number 3 in the UFC Women's pound for pound ranking. She's a former Kunlun Fight strawweight champion. Kunlun Fight, which I'm assuming will be a fighting organization like the UFC from China, and she's the current women's strawweight world champion in the UFC, and she's the first ever Chinese and East Asian champion in the UFC to compete. Now, she's got good stand-up, and when she was fighting Joanna, her strikes looked really, really heavy, and she seems, how can I say, from what I could see, she seemed to absorb certain shots quite well, and she still managed to perform. And when it comes to movement, to her leg work, her footwork, she seems to move pretty well. Now, her opponent, Rose Namajunas, her last fight with Jessica Andrade at UFC 237, and Andrade is going to be fighting on this card as well, UFC 261. Now, she's a former UFC Women's Strawweight champion. She sits at number 1 in the UFC Women's Strawweight rankings in the UFC. She's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She's got good stand-up. She seems to move quite well. I was going to say that she had good ground game. I made this on my notes, but watching on closer inspection, a lot more closer, I was kind of thinking, I'm not so sure, because ground game, someone's gonna get the other person down there first. And looking at her opponent, Zhang, I'm not sure if she's gonna be able to do that, because Zhang's stand up is really, 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 really good. And the fight that she had with Jessica Andrade managed to body slam this girl on the canvas several times. But overall, my verdict, I think Zhang Weili will win against Namajunas at UFC 261. It could go the other way by a miracle. I don't know. I'll wait and see what happens. But for these two fights, I'm going to say Kamaru Usman and Zhang Weili will take the win. That's my opinion, guys. That's my prediction. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please don't forget to leave a like. If you do enjoy my content, please don't forget to subscribe. It really helps me when you do that. I'm sorry, my mouth is just so dry. Don't know what it is. Don't know why it keeps happening. Yes, and you can follow me on Instagram. My name is Ojiako1. On Twitter, my name is Ojiako. And on Facebook, if you still use Facebook, I do. My name is Ojiako. You can get my podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and on Google Podcasts as well, guys. Thanks.